Hello and welcome to this new issue of our XP Boost series. I'm Maggie, I'm project manager at Gamecity Hamburg, and I'm going to be your host for tonight. And for everybody who might not be familiar with us yet, Gamecity Hamburg is the local initiative to support the games industry here in our lovely town of Hamburg in Germany. And apart from our local events and funding programs, we also host several online formats to support indie game developers all around the world. So if you are an indie dev looking for input, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, but also our other social media channels. For this XP Boost series, our goal is to provide insights and guidance in areas of indie dev business that are both, on the one hand, significant to indie devs and also maybe a little bit hard to grasp. Today's topic actually feels exactly that because China is not only one of the most populous countries in the world, it also has one of the largest markets for digital games. But for Western game developers, they might also be very much aware that what works in their home country in terms of marketing and selling your game might not work in China exactly the same way. But there's got to be something you can do with 1.4 billion people. And here today for us is David Clark, who's going to help us understand how that can be achieved if you're an indie game developer. Welcome, David.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me virtually in Hamburg, but also here from London. As you can tell, I'm not particularly Chinese, but I am here to talk about China. And the introduction, there's got to be something you can do with 1.44 billion people. And actually, that really was my starting point into China. My background is publishing. I've always been on the commercial side of video games, and like everybody else, I wanted a slice of the Chinese pie. And you can't help but think to yourself, there's got to be something I can do with 1.44 billion people. And so here is my deck. I hope everyone can see it. Oh. Are we there yet? Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Oh, gosh. Oh, technically, you'd have thought being in the video games industry for as long as I have, I'd get technology.
Now we got it.
Now we got it. 1.44 billion. Sorry about that. Okay, so got to be something you can do with 1.44 billion people. And, the key message in there is China is big. I mean, it is a huge country with huge potential for your businesses. But it doesn't come without its challenges and indeed its commercial dangers. But one of the things I think people struggle to understand with China is exactly what does 1.44 billion people mean? It's just a big number and it's kind of meaningless. So I wanted to start off by kind of giving you some understanding of the size of the potential, the size of the prize for dealing with China. And I found a graphic which I hesitate to use the word steal, borrow, from a company called Visual Capitalist. So if you're listening, guys, I apologize, but it wasn't me that did it. And this is the graphic I wanted to show. So 1.44 billion people is the entire population of the United States and Canada. It is the entire population added on of South America, the continent of South America, plus the entire population of Western Europe. So that's Germany, France, Italy, Spain, the United Kingdom, all of Western Europe, plus Australia and New Zealand. It is a big population. And that's important not only because, you begin to understand the geopolitics of the world we live in at the moment, but it gives you an understanding of what revenue potential is. And I would argue where you should be directing your marketing spend if you are self-publishing or if you're a publisher. 1.44 billion people gives you all of those continents, and I'd argue that's all you need. But we'll come on to that, come back to all of that in a second. But China just doesn't dominate geopolitics. It actually dominates Steam as well. And when we talk about China, what we're talking about is the number of people that use simplified Chinese on Steam. It is the most used language on Steam. Let me just close that down. There we go. At GDC last year, or just gone actually, Valve were talking about the fact that China simplified Chinese is the most used language on Steam. 33.7% of Steam users have their language set to simplified Chinese. And by comparison, English accounts for 33.5%. Now, English users on Steam don't just include native English speakers. I would argue that there's a huge chunk of the rest of the world's population that have their Steam page set up to English language. So, as an individual country, simplified Chinese, by the way, is mainland China. Traditional Chinese is Taiwan, Hong Kong, the sort of other speaking regions of the world, Chinese speaking regions of the world. So not only though does simplified Chinese become the most used language on Steam, in February it peaked at over 50% of the entire Steam user base was made up of people who had set their browsers to simplified Chinese. So it takes up a huge section of Steam. And of course, there's Black Myth Wukong. I think Black Myth Wukong proved to the world, as if proof was really needed, about just how big the Chinese Steam market is. So, Black Myth Wukong sold somewhere in the region of 20 million units, of which, and if you look on the Steam page, there's, 1,147,267 reviews. There are reviews for the game, of which 88%, almost 89% of the reviews are in simplified Chinese. That's a huge slug of sales coming from China. And it's not just Chinese themed games from Chinese developers that do exceptionally well in China. If you look at Split Fiction that launched in March, over 50% of the reviews for that game are in simplified Chinese. So, simplified Chinese gamers are a vital component of sales on Steam and should be a vital component of your revenues. There we go. So the next question, obviously, I tend to get asked in the work that I do is it legal to sell my game in China? And the short answer to that question is yes. Okay, it's a little bit of a grey area, but then again, everything in my experience to do with China is a little bit of a grey area. But even if you do nothing in China, the chances are that 2, 3, 4% of your sales are coming from Chinese gamers. So in my world, Arcus Key, the sales pitch is, well, imagine what you could do if you did something. But it is perfectly legal. The rules that everybody gets so worked up about are called ISBN licenses. And those apply to what are considered Chinese platforms. So if you're selling, looking to sell your mobile game, you will need an ISBN license. There's no getting around it. If you want to sell on what's considered, so if you want to sell on platforms such as PlayStation China, Nintendo China, Steam China, Wii Game, all of those are considered Chinese platforms, all require games that have got ISBN licenses. And they are exceptionally difficult to get, to the point, actually, that they're virtually impossible to get. So far this year in China, there's been ISBN licenses have been granted to 610 domestically developed games and 44 imported games. And that is up on last year. So it's still an incredibly small number, and that covers all platforms. That's mobile, PC, and console. So realistically, the chances of getting an ISBN license are 0, but you can still sell your game in China. And the reason being, of course, is that on these Chinese platforms, there's such a small selection of games that gamers go and buy elsewhere. And it's fine. And it's actually fine as well to market your game in China, which is what I do. I mean, you have to be careful of the sort of standard rules governing advertising and promotion of any product. So even here in the West, you can't have nudity in your marketing. You can't refer to drugs, and certainly in China, you can't criticize the government. But there's fairly obvious stuff that you wouldn't do. So having established the size of the market and the impact that it's got on Steam, and the fact that, yes, it is quite legal to sell your game, and if you're not selling it, you really should be selling it. The next question is what platforms and what genres sell? Well, we've already talked about Steam. We know about Steam. The great thing about Steam, and why everybody focuses on Steam, is that Steam reports Chinese sales, and Chinese, and whereas the other platforms don't. So there's a healthy PlayStation and Switch market in China, but nobody knows exactly how big that market is. And the reason for that is everybody buys grey import hardware. And the reason they buy grey import hardware is that they are not region locked. So the official Chinese versions are region locked to their platform, to the Chinese official stores. But if you remember, there's no games on there because nobody can get an ISBN license. So everyone wants to buy overseas, so they buy grey import hardware. The second problem is that everybody buys their games from overseas stores, so typically Japan and Hong Kong. And the problem there is that those sales are considered either from Japan or Hong Kong. They're not classified as Chinese sales. So nobody knows the size of the market, but there is a healthy PlayStation and Switch market. There is an Xbox market, but it's very, very small. And there is an Epic market, but that's because everybody in China loves a free game. And that's it, nothing more than that. On the genres, well, out of a population of 1.44 billion, quite frankly, there's a market for every single game. Needless to say, the size of the market will vary by genre and by type of game and the quality of game and all the rest of it. But broadly speaking, there's demand for just about everything. That said, there are particular genres that over-index. Not surprisingly, multiplayer games, first-person shooters always do well. Party games, we've talked about split fiction, and simulation games like farming simulation games in particular do well. So how do you go about promoting your game in China? Well, China uses, marketing a product anywhere in the world, you use the same levers. You use video platforms, you use the written word press, you use social media, and then you've got all the other things like shows and partnerships and license things. They're all the same in China, they're no different. However, once you get beyond that point, you're in a completely different world. Video platforms, there's no YouTube and there's no Twitch, right? Instead, it's Huya, Douyu, Bilibili, Douyin, Keishu. Everybody's heard of Bilibili. You've probably even heard of Douyin, China TikTok. But there's a whole world of video platforms out there, all of which can deliver an audience to you. You've also got the written word as well. So by written word, I mean the press. Now in China, there is IGN in China. It's a franchise from Tencent. but it's by no means the biggest press in China. That award goes to YYS-TV, so they're the IGN of China. G-Core, one of our favorites. It's kind of like Edge meets Rock, Paper, Shotgun, perhaps not the biggest, but certainly one of the most influential. UCG got a physical magazine, which is quite unique for China. Some of you may well have heard of Gamersky, which is one of the oldest websites in China. So very different media network, media setup. One of the things I forgot to say about video over-indexes in China. I mean, clearly it's very important everywhere in the world. But in China, it's really significantly over-indexes, and that is because everybody in China was born with one of these in their hands, and consuming video on one of these is far easier than consuming the written word. So video over-indexes. Having said that, it is the press that delivers the details, so they still play an important role in China. We then move on to social media. Everybody's heard of Weibo, but there are other channels, and here's just a small selection of them. Social media in China pretty much fulfills the same role as it does in the West. But beyond Weibo, we've got Zoi Su, known in the West as Red Note or Red Book. You may well have come across Red in recent months. I think it was either earlier this year or the end of last year, the United States government decided they wanted to ban TikTok. And so there was a whole load of TikTok influencers who jumped ship over to Red. So Red, and it's a bit like Instagram meets Pinterest website. And then you've got QQ. QQ is China's answer to Discord, fulfills a very similar sort of role, a very powerful tool, particularly, if you're wanting to do a beta test, for example, you really need to be on QQ because Chinese gamers, broadly speaking, won't go to Discord. Trade press, trade organizations, as in the West, great way to network with the rest of the video games industry in China. Sega is the China Indie Game Alliance. So here in the UK, we've got Yuki. Sega plays a similar sort of role, and the games press as well. Yoshi Patel, known as Game Grape in the West, very influential. I think Game Look again have been around for the longest, but great if you're wanting to reach out to sort of other elements of the games industry in China. Community groups. They play an interesting role in China. Something we'll talk about in a minute is lack of language skills. And because there's a lack of English language skills in China, these community groups play a very important role for disseminating information, particularly before launch. Everybody will have probably heard of Haybox as a key reseller, but they started life as a community group and still are a very influential community group. Keylog, been around for a long time. Baidu is China's only official search engine. Lots and lots of forums on there, and there's a number of other groups. But they play a surprisingly large role in promoting games in China. And then finally, shows and events. So there's some great shows in China. G Fusion, one of our favorite shows. There's 3 events around China, the main one being in Beijing. G Fusion is organized by G-Core, and you will remember that they're one of the press organizations. It's a small event, kind of think PAX East, but it focuses on indie PC and console games. I went last year, and it's a really, really good show. In a similar way, at the bottom I talk about WePlay. WePlay is organized by Sega, the trade organization. This one's in Shanghai. It's in November. G-Fusion in Beijing this year was in fact, it's in about 2 weeks' time. But we play a game similar size and focuses on indie PC and console games. It's a great way not only to introduce your game to consumers, but needless to say, it's a great way to put your game in front of media, Chinese media. And if you do go, one of the things about it is you'll stand out simply by being there. Needless to say, very few Western companies go to these events, and those that do tend to have Chinese offices anyway. Other shows, Bilibili World, that's another huge show in Beijing, sorry, in Shanghai. It's next month. Bilibili World is very similar to MCM Comic Con. Bilibili started, it or sort of was born out of Japanese manga videos, and this show kind of pays homage to that. But over the years, it's broadened into video games. And of course, China Joy, everybody's heard of China Joy. It's kind of E3 for those of you that remember E3, only on steroids. Not particularly brilliant for PC and console indie publishers, but an awesome place to understand or to learn about the Chinese video game ecosystem. Digital shows, so there's lots of shows. I mean, we've got the Summer Games Fest coming up in a couple of weeks' time. And all of those festivals will be broadcast on Bilibili, predominantly Bilibili. So indirectly, if you're in one of those shows, you will be reaching out to a Chinese audience. Some publishers and IP holders have their own dedicated event. So you'll see Warhammer Skulls on the screen here. We've just recently promoted that in China. That was part of a big promotion with Bilibili. And then publishers will have their own events. This particular example on screen is Team 17, but you've got others like Raw Sember from Raw Fury and Nakon. I can't remember the Nakon event now, but they have their own event, and then we're able to put together dedicated promotions on the likes of the Bilibili. So that Team 17 picture is from Bilibili. And, so we are able to do things in China that you can't do in the West. So to do this sort of promotion, you need to pick up the phone and speak to Bilibili head office. So it's a bit like Team 17 trying to pick up the phone to YouTube. Very difficult in the West, but it's something you can do in China. So that's how that's the various channels for marketing the game. And we've seen that when you do get your marketing message in place, there's huge potential. I take you back to Split Fiction, and I take you back to Black Myth Wukong. You pull all of those levers, you communicate all to those channels, and that's the sort of upside that you can potentially achieve. But, if you don't go in prepared, you have the curse of the negative review. China is renowned for its negative review bombing. But there is a reason for that, or there are a number of reasons for that. The first one to mention is that, Steam may be popular in China and console as well, but China is a mobile first market. Mobile dominates. I mean, it's truly off the scale in terms of the size. And because it's mobile games basically mean free-to-play games. Free-to-play games basically mean games as a service, sort of continual optimization and development of the game. So when there's a problem, there's just this continual improvement and bug fixing and additions and so on and so forth. And that's what Chinese gamers expect. And of course, that's not what tends to happen, certainly in the West, with your premium priced games. They tend to be, fixes tend to be done as part of a sprint. That sprint may take a month, 2 months, maybe even 3 months, by which time it's too late, right? And you're going to start getting negative reviews. Chinese gamers don't use the Steam community pages, mainly because they've got the VPN into them to interact, and they quite frankly can't be bothered. Okay, so they're not going to leave negative comments there. What that means is that they leave their comments in the Steam page where they don't need to VPN into. That's easily accessed just over the internet. And so I have a problem, it's a negative, so there's a big thumbs down, you get a negative review. That then was, the problem was that was further enhanced by the fact that up until quite recently, it was for Chinese gamers to edit their review. Again, they needed to VPN into Steam, and they couldn't be bothered. It was too much hassle. Steam, I think, have just changed that, and they are now able to edit their reviews without needing a VPN. So it'll be interesting to see what the impact of that is. And then, of course, you've got the Chinese firewall. And this is a big problem pretty much for anybody that's using a server to support their game. And that tends to be multiplayer games. And so whenever you put a server next to a firewall, all sorts of things, nasty things happen. So issues that you don't really, things that you don't think of as an issue in the West suddenly cascade, and they become an issue in China. The result being is that the online experience is poor, and again, you get negative reviews. So optimization is the name of the game. Then you've got cultural differences, and this is huge. I mean, I've been doing my China business, Arcus Key, now for 5.5 years, coming on for 6 years, and it never ceases to amaze me just how big the cultural chasm is between China and the West. And it plays a huge role in this issue of negative reviews. And I want to, an example that I picked up just the other day, actually. There's a Chinese national here in the UK who runs her own consultancy business, kind of like Arcus Key, but obviously not as good as Arcus Key. Don't tell her that, though. A company called Playful Digital. Anyway, she posted on LinkedIn the other day about Helldivers 2 and the fact that this game had received more than 3,800 negative reviews on Steam. And of those 3,800, a large chunk came out of China. And the reason for that, I'm no expert on the game, this is what she was saying. The reason for that is that in the game, there are a number of fictional cities inspired by real ones. And she quotes 2 examples. One was Prosperity City, which was based loosely around Stockholm. And the other one was Equality on the Sea, which was based around Shanghai. For the Stockholm one, you could achieve 100% liberation. For the Shanghai one, you could get up to, I think it was like 97%, but you couldn't hit, it was impossible to hit 100%. And this really annoyed Chinese gamers. They took it as an affront to their patriotism. It impacted on their patriotism. They saw it as a slight on China, the West picking on China. And they got quite agitated by it, and it led to a lot of reviews. And it was easily avoided. But here in the West, we just don't understand the cultural differences. And then the final thing on the what drives negative reviews is you don't speak Chinese, or there's a damn good chance you don't, and they don't speak English. It really, the rest of the world games in English, broadly speaking, not in China. And that means communication is difficult. So even if you do decide that you want to do something about the review on Steam, you end up using AI to translate it, and it really is very poor. And it just leaves a bad taste in the mouth of the Chinese gamers. So those are the sort of things that that drive negative reviews. I just quickly want to dive into localization in a bit more detail. So a reminder, mainland China, 1.44 billion people, that's simplified Chinese. Traditional Chinese is outside of the mainland. In-game localization, make sure it's good. Make sure it's really, really good, because it really does upset your average Chinese gamer, particularly if you've been using some sort of AI tool to do your localization for you. And don't just focus on in-game, focus on your marketing assets, your promotional tools. Localize those as well. Your press release, your art, your video. Without that, they just, they can't understand the message that you're trying to get across. And perhaps the single most important service that Arcus Key does for our clients is to help our publishing partners localize their game name. Again, don't forget, no one speaks, reads, or writes English. So if you're using an English name in the Latin script, they don't understand it. Right? So they then go off, and sorry, if you don't give them a Chinese game name, they'll go off and they'll create one for themselves. And of course, at that point, you've lost control of it. And that name isn't searchable on Steam, so it's a barrier to sale. Get a Chinese game name. And that's about it. With one exception, my hot tip out of all of this: take your time. When dealing with China, take your time. Prepare. Get everything sorted well in advance. Don't wake up one day and say, "Oh, my game launches in 3 weeks. I must go and promote, market my game in China." It's too late. You won't be ready. Find somebody who can help you. Speak to somebody who's launched a game in China. I mean, obviously, I'd recommend you come and speak to Arcus Key. Slightly biased opinion, but go and speak to someone. Do your research. Get ready. Do it early, and then move into China. And if you do that, the potential to drive revenue to your business is huge. 1.44 billion people. And that's me. If you want to get hold of me, bang on 30 minutes, not bad going. I'll stop sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much,
Thank
David. Already learned a lot. I already have a couple of questions to dive a little bit deeper into the topic, but also to our dear chat, please feel free to post any questions you might have on your side. One question I had, because you mentioned simplified Chinese as the definitely more important language.
Yep.
Do you still think that developers should cover traditional Chinese as well, or only if they can really afford it?
I've got slightly controversial view on this.
Mhm.
I think you need 3 languages for your game. Your native language, so if you're a German developer, of course you're going to put German in your game, English, and simplified Chinese. If you do that, you're covering a huge chunk of the world. And most people in the rest of the world, I think, game in English. There will always be exceptions, but it takes time and money to localize. So you localize in the important ones, and certainly simplified Chinese. I mean, 1.44 billion, and I don't know what the population of Taiwan and Hong Kong is, but it's not a lot. So simplified Chinese out of the 2, most definitely.
And while we're on the topic of localization, you also mentioned in-game localization. How far should developers go there? So is it enough to have UI and controls translated or localized, or of course text, or does it also have to be like voiceover? How are Chinese players usually feeling about that?
Most publishers will do interface and subtitles, and that's fine. Just do them well. I mean, the number of times from big publishers as well, this is where they've got them traditional and simplified mixed up. They've said that simplified Chinese, and you open the game, it's actually traditional Chinese. They'll miss strands of text in key places. It's just sloppy, and it's just annoying. Or they'll, somebody's cheated somewhere down the line and maybe done the first 1,000 words really well, and then the rest is just AI translated. It just backfires big time. Don't do it.
Yeah. Absolutely. One last question about the on the topic of localization, but also the decision how far you want to go into investing into the Chinese market. For a very story-heavy game, big word count, of course, also for subtitles, the translation cost is going to be much higher than maybe simple puzzle game. Also, I suppose that in story-heavy games, sometimes the cultural differences that you mentioned can play a bigger role. So would you
Yeah.
say there are certain genres where you think it makes more sense to put a lot of effort into the Chinese market and others less?
Well, let me give you a recent example. Raw Fury recently released Blueprints, which has been a huge hit for them. But, you know, Blueprints, it was play on words, it was very word heavy. And whilst it was technically possible to localize, it was a big job. And they decided that it wasn't commercially viable. It wasn't worth the risk, and which I think was the right decision. But on those circumstances, what we always say is make sure that you don't tick the simplified Chinese box as the language options. You know, make it very clear from the start that this game does not support simplified Chinese. And sometimes you may even have to go as far as to explain why. And then there are other games, you know, I've spoken to guys, you know, these big online world games, you know, like 10 million words. That's like a lot.
Yeah.
So on those ones, you know, you make a commercial decision. But for most indie games, it's commercially worth your while localizing it.
Mhm. So we do have a couple of questions directly from the chat that I'd like to bring in. The first is not so much a question, but on the topic of social media platforms. You named a lot of them. To be honest, I haven't heard of the most of them. And the person mentions that there's also the problem to get access to those social media platforms without a Chinese phone number.
That is absolutely correct. Whoever it was that said that, well done. Oddly enough, I know a company that can help you with that.
In general, would
But
you say that it also makes sense to work with a Chinese publisher? I know you
well,
are not a publisher, but there are
no.
some.
So there's two really interesting comments in there. So you're absolutely right. The first one is mobile phones. Chinese platforms, for a variety of reasons. Actually, well, no, let me rewind that. Some platforms, it's very easy. So Bilibili, pretty much anybody can set up an account on Bilibili. The problems with Bilibili start when you want a verified account. Okay, so that's the blue tick. All right. Then you need a Chinese mobile number that is registered to a Chinese national living in China. Okay. Weibo is far stricter, and QQ. They're both far stricter. Right? No matter what you do, you need the Chinese mobile phone number and all the rest of it. I asked the question why Bilibili was different, actually only about 2 weeks ago, and apparently it's because they're in Shanghai and they're a bit more liberal in Shanghai, and they turn a blind eye to these things. But that's how it works. And what that means is, so we do this for our clients, but it's a nightmare to try and transfer. You know, there comes a day when our client says, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. Can you give it back, control back to me? And you can't do it. Unless they got somebody in China to hand it over to. So that's the first thing. So one of the solutions is publishers. On that point, that's how Arcus Key was born, was because back in my publishing days, how do I move into the Chinese market? I didn't want a publishing deal because, you know, the 70-30 revenue share on paper, it's great, it's low risk, go for it. The problem was, or the problem is, in my opinion, that the 70-30 revenue share lasts forever. So long after your publishing partner's done their work, they're still claiming all the revenue, 30% of the revenue. And secondly, they're incentivized to spend money when they're earning money. To spend money beforehand is a risk for them. So whereas as a developer or a publisher, you want the money spent before the game launches so that there's demand for the game. So it didn't make sense to me. What I needed, because I knew I could sell my game in China, 4% of the sales and blah, blah, blah. What I needed was somebody to build awareness, and I couldn't find anybody. I needed a PR and marketing agency, and that's how Arcus Key was born. So the two kind of tie in together, and Arcus Key then do this whole social media thing with the mobile phone number.
Going into the topic of also marketing. One listener says, "Hello, David. Very nice talk. I know that influencers play a huge role in China. Does that also count for games? If so, have you ever worked with some?"
So whoever said those nice words, thank you. I like you. You can ask all the questions you want. Influencers in China are hugely important because everybody uses these in China. And Arcus Key, I mean, I don't, sitting in London, speaking in my very British voice, tend to deal too many Chinese influencers, but there's a team in China that do, and it's almost the same way as dealing with influencers in the West. There are a number of subtle differences, but that's a whole conversation for another day. But it is better, whether it's through Arcus Key or anybody else, boots on the ground, speaking to influencers, and either getting them to cover the game organically for free or paying for their coverage. I think that answers the question.
Yeah. So in Europe and the USA, for example, German indie developer would maybe reach out personally to some of the influencers through their accounts, or contact their agency, or there are also like those services like Keymailer or Lurkit and the likes that help you get in touch with those influencers. Are there any services like Keymailer or stuff?
No.
In China?
No, there aren't. There's no key distribution services for influencers. You've got to do it the old-fashioned way, and reach out individually. There are agents for the bigger influencers, but as in the West, if you're big enough to have an agency or an agent, you want paying. The interesting thing, and this is, okay, I'm blowing our own trumpet here, for which I kind of only partially apologize for. But again, the big thing about China is everybody communicates through WeChat. Okay, that is the default way of communication. And what that means is if you're communicating via WeChat, you have the mobile phone number. So that means that there's no spamming for keys. It's, there's somebody actually talking directly. You want a key? What are you going to give me for that key? And have you done it?
Super interesting. We have some more questions. How much marketing budget is required to make a difference here? Or also at which numbers are they starting to work with indies for, so just a ballpark number without the localization costs?
Well, if it's for Arcus Key, of course, it's this much, lots of money. And wife and 3 kids and all the rest of it. If it's anybody else, don't give them any money. How much money? Oh gosh, it's really difficult to say. I mean, so our business model is that everything has to be done manually in China. So there's no key distribution for coverage. There's no press gathering websites, that overnight will pull down all the coverage that you've got. You've got to do everything manually. You've got to reach out to people. It's manual. So the way our business works, I can't speak for anybody else, is that you've got an agency fee here, and then you've got any, if you want to do a paid influencer campaign, that's on top, and without wanting to go into the commercial realities of life, by the time you put the two of those together, it can add up. And often it's beyond the means of small indies. You know, it is possible. We do work with self-publishing indies, but if it's your first game and all the rest of it, it's expensive, I think.
Maybe
Not
we could.
Arcus Key, we're value for money, obviously.
No doubt about it, but yeah, since we do have a lot of small budget indies in our audience, yeah, maybe we can identify a couple of things that you can do before you do nothing. For example, there's one question. Do you think an unverified Bilibili account would still be worth it
Yes,
to simply upload all trailers and to see what happens,
yes,
or do you need a verified account and speak Chinese to set up the
yeah.
tags, etc.?
So there are a few things that you can do free of charge. Okay. First of all, your Steam page. Okay. Make sure it's, I say free of charge, somebody's got to do the translation, but make sure it's properly localized, simplified Chinese. And don't forget about your Chinese game name. And, go to your local university or whatever, find, if you're a Chinese speaking person, you can do this. And that's the easiest way to get up and running. Second thing is, on that vein, there's enough Chinese speakers around the world outside of China to help you localize your marketing materials. Unverified Bilibili account, absolutely. I was speaking to an indie dev who's become quite a cult because his Chinese is so rubbish that, but he's got no shame, and he became quite a hit. I think he was from Denmark, if I remember rightly. Completely mad bloke, but did a fantastic job. So there are options, and as much as I dismiss local publishing partners, commercial realities of life are such that you choose whatever option you can afford. What I would say to everybody is that if you have a question about, it's difficult to talk about money on a call like this, but if anybody wants to reach out, right, it doesn't cost them to talk to it doesn't cost anything for anyone to talk to me. Right, my contact details are on there, and feel free to share them. I'll always answer. I don't know how many people are on this call. There's about 2,000 or something, and I'm going to get swamped. I might live to regret it, but by all means, reach out and we can have a chat. Some of you will have budget, but even then, is your game right for the market? Are you going to get a return on your investment? We can have that conversation, and I'll be more than happy to do so. More than happy to make some pointers and help you navigate and do your own thing if necessary.
Wonderful. Also, something that we have to take into account when thinking about, does it pay off to invest into Chinese localization and Chinese marketing, is that the price on Steam in China is much lower than in European, and so the dollar price will also always be much higher. So in terms of revenue, it might also be something where you can't expect as much as you might hope for when you see the number of units sold.
Yes, true. Well, it's not much, but it is definitely less than in
Yeah.
US dollars or euros. But there's a couple of things. I mean, first, the main thing actually is 1.44 billion people. You've got a big market, but it is an interesting point, and you need to look at China. You should look at it commercially like you would any other market. You need to do the ROI. And if you have gone into China in advance and thought about it and planned it, you'll start to get some data, most notably, of course, wish lists. And if you're seeing that China's spiking on your wish list, so for example, you might decide to do a Steam Next Fest, and Steam Next Fest might be your toe in the water. And if you can see Chinese wishlist numbers beginning to rise, traffic on your Steam page coming in from China, then you can start making a considered decision. The other thing as well, there's so much to talk about with China. I skimmed over the top big time. But one of the big problems with China is a complete lack of data from all your marketing activity. So in the West, you get all the viewing numbers, even on Twitch, concurrent numbers, just doesn't exist in China. There's no APIs into the back of any of these services. Right? So the only KPI that we've got as Arcus Key is sales, which is a problem for an agency because we can't influence sales, we can influence awareness, but we have this KPI. And so what we say to everybody is that we will, we'll review the game, and if we think we can deliver an ROI for all that investment you're going to make, we'll say yes, we'll promote it. But if we don't think we can get an ROI, right, we reject it. Far better you save your money and spend it in the West. But ROI is the big thing. And you're right, it is expensive going into China, and you need to think about it. You need to prepare.
When you mentioned that the KPI situation is much more difficult on the Chinese platforms, but you do have some basic numbers like how many views are on the trailer video, stuff like that, or not even that?
So, okay, now we're getting into the nitty gritty. So, Bilibili's got two parts to it: the YouTube part and the Twitch part. Okay, Bilibili pretty much dominates the YouTube market in China. Right, the Twitch part is where all the live streaming parts, where all the competition is. That's the serious competition. And on those, the only number that you can view, unless it's your own channel slightly differently, but the only number that you can get is the number of subscribers. On the YouTube side of Bilibili, you get all the YouTube numbers. So the number of subscribers, the number of views, the number of likes, the number of shares. That's great. That's easy. And if you've got your own channel, of course, you've got access to all your own data. Okay. And it applies to the press, and it applies to China TikTok, and it applies to Weibo. It's a nightmare. It really is.
Okay, super interesting to hear. We are nearing the end of our event, but last call for any questions to the chat if if you have any more on your mind. I had one, but now I forgot which it was. As you mentioned, I think we could talk for hours about the topic because it sounds just super. Yeah, it's just a large topic. One more thing about you mentioned several times that it absolutely makes sense to localize your. I'm not quite sure if you said localize or translate your game title. So are you just referring to the the font I want to say
No. So,
or is it a different title even?
yeah. So if I can, here we go. I'm going to share my screen again. I hope that's possible. This was the slide I was showing. Okay, I hope this is big enough for everyone to see. But there's two parts. This is your capsule artwork. Now, you can update that at any time. Anybody can do that. This is your actual Steam page name, and if your Steam page has been approved by Valve, the only other way you can change it to a simplified Chinese name is you've got to submit a ticket to Valve, and 48 hours later it's done. Okay, so it's really, really simple, and this only gets shown on your simplified Chinese Steam page. Great. But in some cases, it will be a literal translation. In other cases, it's kind of in the theme of, it's taking, the guys certainly that do it for us, they will take, a theme, they'll take the style, what the meaning of the game is, and they'll give it a cultural translation.
All right. Yeah, super interesting. I also didn't know that about the changing the title on Steam, that you have to do this via Steam ticket. That's also
That's
a very
when,
good hint.
if Valve haven't approved the page, before they've approved it, then you can do it anytime you want.
Ah, okay.
But when they approve it, that's when your page goes live.
Yeah.
And it's at that point you have to ask for their help. And they'll give it. It's not a problem.
Yeah, that's super important to know. Thank you a lot. I don't think we have any more questions at this point. We're also nearing our time that we scheduled for this. Yeah, as we both mentioned, I think we could talk a lot about the whole
Yeah,
topic. I think it might also be overwhelming for indie devs because you also mentioned the hard truth that it is difficult in a way to get into the market, and you do have to put a lot of and also sensible effort into things like translation. It was also again mentioned in the chat that AI translations are not a good idea,
yeah.
but there is a lot to gain.
And we haven't even talked really about multiplayer games. I mean, that's just a whole new world of pain. And
How much time do you have?
I know
No,
exactly.
that
We've skimmed over it, but I hope it's been of help and value. My offer was sincere. If anybody would like to reach out, please do so. Always happy to talk about China. And that doesn't cost anything. So please do reach out. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, David. And also, of course, thank you so much to our audience for listening, for being interested, and also for your very good questions. I hope you enjoyed this issue of Gamecity XP Boost. And if you haven't seen them yet, you can find all past issues in a dedicated playlist on our YouTube channel. I highly recommend all the talks. For example, we had two great ones with Chris Zukowski lately on game demos and on the importance of Steam, of genre on Steam. Importance of Steam would also be a topic. And yeah, if you are a game dev in or around Hamburg who's watching us today, make sure to follow our channels and drop by at our local events as well. So for tonight, thanks to everyone for joining and have a good night.